So we're going to be starting, as I said, a new series, and I think it's been great that we've had the lead up that we have had. I think that our last series of the emergence of the divine feminine with Matthew Fox and Rabbi Rami Shapiro was a perfect lead in to this now conversation about moving from the toxic to the sacred. And I specifically decided to name it that because we have been talking about, realizing what toxic, not just toxic masculinity, but toxic theology is, and how we can start to reclaim, rename, and engage in something that's life affirming, and to hopefully make shifts happen. So what we're going to be covering in between now and through Lent is we're going to be talking about what is creation spirituality. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of that. One of those, as Ed has been referring to, is original blessing versus original sin. We're going to talk about that tonight. Some of this information might be brand new. Some of it might go, oh, that sounds familiar, and it probably does because I talk about it a lot. So for others, it'd be like, oh, that's old hat. Good for the reminder. The other thing too is, and this is what I do hope happens, is that I hope in the conversations that we're going to be having over the course of the week, for some, that it might be giving the words to something you already know. It gives the language to something you already feel in your heart. And I'll be honest, when I first started to be exposed to creation spirituality, I went, oh my God, that's what I believe. And to hear the language and to also know that I wasn't just some radical off on my own. Well, I'm still a radical, but not on my own. It made me go, okay, I'm onto something here. And not only are we onto something, we're onto something that's been going on for centuries. The unfortunate thing is life affirming theology, meaning God talk, the framework that we put the divine in, is often not talked about. And we're going to talk about how come as well. So with that, I wanted to just share a few things with you. We're going to first begin with what are some of the essential parts, essential paradigms to to creation spirituality. And then, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about original sin, original blessing. Hopefully we'll be able to get through all of that tonight. And if we don't, we'll carry over into the following week. But I'm going to try to tie us up with that tonight. I did send you a number of handouts that you can go ahead and take a look at throughout the week. We're not going to cover all of them tonight, but it's, in your spare reading time, if you want to take a look at something, go ahead and take a look at it, and we'll go from there. So with that, I want to share with you, this is by one author that I thought was very good. It's 6 Essentials to Creation Spirituality. And this is pretty succinct. Some of the principles for this is that the universe and all life within it is fundamentally a blessing. It sounds simple enough, but how many preachers, teachers, politicians come from the starting point that people are broken? People aren't good enough. We hear from a lot of pulpits that, we're born to original sin. Well, that whole conversation that Rabbi Rami had with us about Adam and Eve's story kind of tells you where some of that came from, but it also tells you why it's not true. Secondly, it's through the work of spiritual practice that we move beyond fear and into compassion and discover our deep and true selves. We talk often about what is your spiritual practice. What mine is isn't what Tom is, isn't what Christie's is, isn't what Patricia's is, etc. But we all can find what works for us as a spiritual practice or spiritual relationship with God. The spiritual journey can be understood as a dance moving in and out of 4 mystical paths. And this is really the crux besides original blessing, these four paths are what are essential to creation spirituality. In different paths, whether it's Christianity, Buddhism, etc., they might have some, but they don't always necessarily practice all four. Okay, or they might focus on one versus another. Some of these are the path of awe, delight, gratitude, joy, known as the via positiva. The path of uncertainty, darkness, suffering, letting go. I'd also add to that grief, pain. Unfortunately, a lot of Christian churches focus a lot on the cross and forget about the resurrection. But this is a part of it. This is a part of it. A fourth is about birthing, about creativity, about passion. It is about art. Penny and Nancy, you are like so right there with so much of this stuff. You know, art is crucial to the process of being in a path of wholeness. And the fourth is the path of justice, healing, celebration, rebirth, and resurrection. Because it's like we can do all that inner work and we can be living a life of gratitude and we can be creative, we can find our passion, but if we don't do something with it, then it's not connected to the world around us. A fourth component of it is every one of us carries with us the capacity to be a mystic, to be creative, to be a visionary, and to be an agent for positive change. The agent for positive change is also referred to as a prophet. So we all have the ability to be visionaries, to be creative, as well as the ability to make change. It's our responsibility to cultivate this for the benefit of Earth and its creatures. Fifth, we rejoice in and courageously honor the rich diversity within the cosmos, which is expressed in every individual and embodies multiple cultures, religious, and ancestral traditions. And lastly, ecological and social justice are our priority as imperatives for the healing, sustainability, and harmony among our species and the entire Earth community. This is I did not create this visual. The art piece in the middle, the continuous Mobius, but this is a perfect way of looking at it. It's not like we go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, but we intersect constantly throughout our life into the different aspects. Now, does any of that sound familiar, or does any of that resonate, or is any of that new to folks?
New.
New.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. A lot of it resonates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of it I've seen in what I think I mentioned, transpersonal psychology or transpersonal spiritual development, themes that are universal in all cultures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Christy?
Yeah, to me, it feels really intuitive. It's just like, yes, like maybe I know the exact words for it, but yes, I felt all of that. And seeing it mapped out that way, maybe that's the first time I've seen it in that form, but all of it was like, yes, 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 yes. So it's very interesting. It was like from a spiritual knowing to a cerebral one, right? What you put forth right now.
And the thing about this is that, first of all, it's not new. This is ancient. This philosophy or spiritual understanding, it goes through. There's strains of it in all faiths and all spiritual traditions, whether it is the Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, or whether it's the indigenous cultures. I will say that the indigenous cultures have got it right. All of these you will see in it, whether it's Aboriginal, whether it's a native indigenous to the Americas, whether it's the Celtic religion, right? In Europe, or in Africa. These concepts you will see in one form or another. In Christianity, around 300 AD is when Christianity started to lose some of this. And we're going to talk about that because that's really, really important. But when you look at the teachings, the teachings of the Old Testament, as well as especially the teachings of Jesus, you will see these resonated over and over and over again. He talks a lot about suffering, and he talks a lot about gratitude. He talks about creating, and he talks about transforming the world. These are our true components. Now, the thing that is talked about when we and we're going to be looking at this in the container of Christianity. Okay, although we can look at this in the container of any faith tradition, we're really going to look at this from the Christian container, if you will. And as I said, when we get stuck in any one of these, we lose out the rest, and we lose the whole picture. For instance, how many of us, as I said, and how many of our church traditions might have gotten stuck on the cross, right?
Mm-hmm.
Life is bad. Life is horrible. We're all sinners and we're gonna go to hell, right? You know, you get stuck in that negative, right? And what happens when you get stuck in too much of the negative? That's who we become. Right?
And you forget who you really are.
You forget who and whose you really are.
Yeah.
When you went through those first four things on the list, that's what I thought. This is reminding us who we really are, and we can be co-creators with God when we find a way out of no way.
Yes, exactly. And then another way of also looking at this is, what about what I call the happy clappy religion, the happy clappy Christian churches? What I mean by that is, it's all about goodness. If anything bad happens to you, it's because you deserved it. You did something wrong. Let's just praise Jesus, right?
Yep.
So that goes to the other extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Either
Well,
of
it
those are
turns to
healthy.
blame, doesn't it?
It sure does. There's something wrong with you. And, you know, we often say, well, the Jewish people are good at guilt. The Catholics are good at guilt. Yes, both of them are. And you know what? Metaphysicians are also good at guilt.
That's absolutely true.
Because if bad things happen, that means you weren't meditating enough or you weren't whatevering enough. No, it means it's a part of life.
You
Breathe.
didn't hold your crystal in just the right direction on the right phase of the moon.
Right.
Yeah, you manifested it, right?
You manifested that bad juju.
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
sometimes bad stuff happens, right? Just flat out and simple. And if we take all of these experiences and then put it in our faith container, we can look at these experiences in a different way. If we look at, say, for instance, you know, the chaos of the world right now, right? Chaos of the world, the war in the world, the violence going on in the world. If we can look at that in the container and see it is a very real thing and it's on a real path, and we won't necessarily have to stay stuck there. And we have the ability to do our own work that maybe I can't change what Putin is going to do, but I sure the heck can do what I can do here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that times like this are calling our collective consciousness to wake us all up,
Yes.
right? I mean, I mentioned some of this on Sundays as a little bit of a tangent, but it's not. This is waking some people up to some of the other atrocities that are in unfairness and violence that's going on in other parts of the world, right?
Yeah.
What's happening in Israel to the Palestinians, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
right? Unpopular subjects to talk about. What has our own government done? And the fact that gas prices are as high as they are. Wow, I think there might be some alternatives to that already on the books, like electric cars, right? So it's bringing a lot of this stuff to consciousness, all right? So through that lens and through that container, what happens when we focus on just one part or another of this, we get imbalanced. And what I hope as we go through this is that we can find that Christianity is our core faith. For most of us, I know that it is. How can we find Christianity to be a healing container and not one that is a destructive one?
Right.
Now, I want to share just a little bit more before I go on to original blessing component of this. Well, as we are going on to the original blessing portion of this, I take that back. How does this play out in our faith? The other component about this that's really, really important, besides taking the points of view that I just talked about, is to also really start to realize, as Ed has alluded to, that really our faith is about coming from the perspective of original blessing and not original sin. I want to share a little bit. Many of us are familiar with the concept of original sin, the idea that all humans are born. Original sin is the theme that all of us are born as sinners, and it is unfortunately a central doctrine of the majority of Christian churches. The idea goes something like this: Adam and Eve's disobedience in the Garden of Eden tainted human existence for eternity. Fallen from grace, humans remain out of sorts from God, unworthy on our merits. God sent Christ to die for our sins because, you know what, we are pond scum. Those who believe in Christ are saved from the effects of original sin, namely eternal damnation. And I love that this is here. What may surprise many Christians is that Jews have never believed in original sin. For Jews, as we learned a few weeks ago, the Garden of Eden story is seen as an ancient story that was just trying to explain why things aren't perfect in the world. Specifically, at least when it was written down in the 9th century, why men, quote, toil in the fields and women bear the pains of childbirth. Instead, Judaism adheres to the theology of Genesis 1, and this is important. Remember, there are more than one creation story. Genesis 1, where God declares before resting that everything created is very good. Furthermore, even Augustine's theology became, even though Augustine's theology became the official doctrine of the church, many Christians chose to believe otherwise, even in his day. One such person was a Celtic monk who confronted him directly, and oh, shocker, he was banned, Pelagius, he was banned from the Roman Empire in 418 by charges of disturbing the peace. Several months later, he was excommunicated. The doctrine of original sin was a convenient truth for the builders of the empire. They could continue to conquer the world and subdue peoples. Do you remember when we were talking about the cross and the lynching tree?
Mhm.
And remember when we were talking about a lot of those things? Where did it come from? It came from church doctrine, which was based upon the concept of original sin. And that original sin concept made it so that church leaders felt that we had the responsibility to subdue and conquer the earth and other people. Part of the conflict, the teachers of the Celtic mission, was that people who believed they were made in the image of God and were therefore bearers of ancient wisdom and an unspeakable dignity were not a people and could be easily cowed by power and external authority. Once again, if you know that you are divine, if you really believe that you were created in the image of God, right? All of the attacks put upon us, I don't mean just me, but people throughout the world, wouldn't stick. And if everybody, especially church leaders, understood and remembered that after God created, God said it is good, then all of creation, all of the inhabitants of the earth, the inhabitants of the universe, and people are all created in the image of God and are good. And if we really believe that, we could not attack other people.
Yeah.
and we could not control other people. The reason why wars and the violence that's going on is so easy for people to do is because they truly believe that the other person deserves it. And if you believe the other person deserves it, we see the atrocities that happen. But then if instead it was drilled into children's heads that they are perfect, even in our imperfections, the world would be different.
Mm.
Do you understand the two? So, and I want to pull this out just a little bit more. The concept, the theological, the dogma, the teachings, the cemented teachings of the Christian church that said we were born in original sin was put forth by Augustine in the late 300s AD. And it became the law of the church. And it stuck. It stuck. It is not biblically based. We are told it is, but it is not. Second, that whole conversation about Adam and Eve and how we have interpreted it, Genesis 2, is the whole reason that people can have used, amongst other things, to justify the concept that we're all born in sin, therefore we need Jesus to redeem us. I do believe we need redemption, but not because we are inherently bad, not because we are inherently sinful, and not because we are inherently broken. But I do believe we need redemption from our bad choices, our mistakes, and the things that we've done to ourselves or others. I know for myself, I've needed second and third and fourth chances. And I've needed support when I've done stuff that I haven't been proud of, or when I've done stuff that's hurt me or hurt others. So hear this correctly. Embracing and acknowledging that original blessing is truly at the core of the teachings of Christ. It doesn't say you don't need Christ. It's not even saying that, Jesus still isn't your Lord and Savior. There's a lot of things that we need saving from. A good prayer is, Jesus, save me from myself.
Yes.
The other one is Jesus, save me from your followers. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
So beginning from the starting point of realizing that we have been made in the image of God, Goddess, the divine. Just think about how things would be different. Feedback. Oh, Tom's reaching for his button.
Yeah, not only humans, everything created, everything that exists has, for lack of a better term, God's DNA.
Mhm.
Everything that exists, material is divine. There's no separation. It's a whole total, I don't know where, the dualistic thinking that soul is good, spirit is good, material, no. Material is absolutely holy and necessary. As Christ, the incarnation, it wasn't just Jesus. He is modeling that we are all that. Everything that exists is holy.
Mhm. Yeah, Patricia.
For me, when I think about the Adam and Eve story and eating the apple, for one, it wasn't an apple, but it was from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So what is it that started all this? What started all this is as we evolved into the human species, and we started to notice that some things are good and some things are bad, and we started to worry. and we started to have fear, and we started to have shame, and we started to have guilt, because we had the knowledge of good and evil. That brings with it all those things. And for me, the message of God has always been trying to help to save us from that,
Mhm.
and bring us back to our holiness and our oneness, and the loving one another, looking out for one another, and realizing that even though we understand all these terrible things that could happen, that good things could happen also, that life can still be blessed. And I think that's what the message of God is trying to bring us back to. So it is related to that fall that happened when we first gained this extra knowledge, but it's fear that this knowledge brings, that faith in God can bring us back away from.
And there's two things with that. One, that fear that you talked about led to separation.
Fear of the other as well.
We separated ourselves from God, and we separated ourselves from each other.
Mhm.
Therein lies the sin.
I'm
Therein-
afraid that God will be mad at me. I'm afraid that my brother will hurt me.
Right.
Because I know I think about life rather than just acting instinctually.
Mhm. Mhm. And you saw how in the beginning, one of the essences of creation spirituality is being able to turn that fear into understanding
Mhm.
and compassion. You know, eating the apple is one thing. How it was interpreted and how it was then taught is where the breakdown happened.
Yeah.
It's where the breakdown happened. Yeah.
And how can we use that knowledge to grow rather than to shrink away?
Absolutely. And how can we reconnect? You got it. How can we reconnect? John, go ahead.
I think this concept possibly came through Ernest Holmes, and it was a concept of redefining what the word sin meant.
Mhm.
Because as a Catholic, sin was like bad shit.
Mhm.
And simply it meant miss the mark,
Yes.
which meant maybe your timing was bad. You didn't have social skills. You didn't know how to say it. I mean, you just,
Mhm.
whatever, you didn't have the skill. 6 years ago, I went back to Ohio, and I asked a friend to recommend a book. I said, give me a book that's left an impression on you. And it was a writing by Augustine. And as I'm reading this book, I was horrified.
Mhm.
It was like, you are evil, the body's evil. And I was just like, I don't believe that. So I gave him the title that I wanted was The Untethered Soul,
Mhm.
which was, I forgot who did it, Michael Singer, I believe.
Mhm.
But it was basically saying, you're a good human being and we learn. And the process of life is to constantly, be reborn. We fall, we get up, we learn, we fall, we get up. But it's always a rebirthing, but it's always toward an evolution. And not that we are evil. And I realized I came from that background, that innately we're evil. And I don't believe in sin anymore.
Mhm.
It was such a relief.
Mhm.
And
Right.
I heard a definition of sin that stuck with me my entire life, and I have no idea where I heard it. It was some preacher, in one of the sermons, but they said sin is not drinking or gambling or carousing or doing all of those things, but sin is not being as good as you are capable of being. And I really kind of like that one.
Mhm. Mhm. Exactly. Exactly.
It reminds me of when I was in school and teacher would write on my grade card, does not live up to expectations.
Right. Right.
That puts a different spin when you hear verses like, we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Mhm.
It's like, well, we got to raise up and be part of our glory. That's what that means, not you're bad, your pawns come.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I ran across this 2-minute thing on what original blessing is. I thought it was great, so I figured I'll share that with you real quickly here. And I love this. I thought to myself, I could have done that.
Welcome to our video series for the spiritually curious, where we take real-life conversations and questions and share them in short video format. Today's question is about original sin and comes from someone we will call Barb. Barb asked, "What do you think about original sin? I grew up with this teaching, and I'm just not sure if I believe it anymore."
Hi, Barb. Thanks for reaching out. The doctrine of original sin comes from Augustine in the 5th century, and it is a teaching still found in many churches today. Richard Rohr writes this: "In one way, the doctrine of original sin was good and helpful, in that it taught us not to be surprised at the frailty and wounding that we all carry. Just as goodness is inherent and shared, so it seems with evil." He goes on to write, "Knowledge of our shared wound ought to help us be forgiving and compassionate with ourselves and with one another." So it seems as though the doctrine of original sin has only emphasized one part of us. The Bible also teaches that we are created in the image of God. And in the book of Genesis, God declares we are good. Matthew Fox coined the term original goodness to capture this idea found in Genesis. Danielle Schroer writes in depth about original goodness. She says this: "Original blessing reminds us that God calls us good and beloved before we are anything else. Sin is not the heart of our nature, blessing is." The doctrine of original blessing also acknowledges that the deepest level of our human nature is designed to both hear God's voice and walk in his way. And finally, she notes, our center of gravity is original blessing. So we hope this helps you to reframe some ideas around the ideas of original sin and original blessing.
If you have questions,
I thought that was very succinct and very spot on. So I'll share that with you. I also want to share another little bit more of. Hang on just one second. Do you see writing or do you just see the video?
Writing.
Okay, perfect. So this is from something some of you know my dissertation was on this, so you're getting the inside of my dissertation. Original blessing, both and. 4 simple words that can strike fear into the heart of any fundamentalist. 2 concepts that both shatter and heal, shatter thousands of years of Christianity as we have known it, yet they have the ability to heal the universe for generations to come. Instead of thinking of things as original sin and that we're all pond scum and we're unworthy, allowing ourselves to truly embrace the original blessing concept, as I said, can shift everything. The other thing that creation spirituality and original blessing does is to give us the concept of both and. Somebody said a few minutes ago of like the negatives, the hierarchy, the competition that is prevalent in our society, which the whole doctrine of original sin helped to create. Put man against a woman. It put adults against children, humans against animals, humans against the environment, racial, white against black. It created gay and straight. And when I say that, I mean it created conflict and competition, that one is better than the other. We've also, heard over, a period of time about how, for instance, Christianity is better than everything else, right? So there's this pecking order and hierarchy that was established, and the whole concept of original sin helps to underpin that. Just like it was the underpinning for the doctrine of destiny, with when when the Christian church went, the Catholic Church went and colonized huge aspects of the world. When we acknowledge we have come into this world as a blessing and not already tainted with sin, we find ourselves making a courageous spiritual act. And I've often described it as the modern day articulation of the Genesis story. God created and saw that it is good, very good. In creation, spirituality celebrates all of creation, from earth to the four-legged, winged, and two-legged creatures. And it sees all of us as the Creator does, good and very good. And I want to jump down to, it sounds like, well, this all kind of makes sense. How come we don't grasp hold of that? And two things. Here's what Rosemary Radford Ruther writes about this duality. Creation spirituality starts with original blessing rather than original sin. It regains the understanding that our original and true nature, the original and true nature of all things, is very good, just like I just said, and we've said it a few times already. Creation spirituality unleashes vitality, creativity, and playfulness. It is generous, mutually affirming of diversity, and non-competitive, unlike fall redemption spirituality. It does not set up competitive dualisms between males and females, celibate and married, heterosexual, homosexual, white and black, Christian, non-Christian, us versus them. It is an egalitarian way and pluralistic way of rejoicing in the manyness of beings that interconnect in a rich cosmic community, and it allows us to lay aside our defenses, our needs to control, dominate, and destroy the other. It is spirituality that is needed for an ecological peacemaking and just world community. How does that resonate with folks?
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then the question is, why isn't this embraced? And I want to expand beyond a little bit about well, it's just because people want to, rule the world themselves. And I think it also has a little bit more to do with if we personally realize and embrace the blessings that we are, it comes with huge responsibility.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay. I want to
it
share
does.
this. I want to share this with you, part of a piece that I had also written. I haven't understood why the liberating message of Jesus has not been more clearly and blatantly taught in Sunday school, and why it has not been plastered in neon on the billboards of life. I'm now coming to the realization that this oversight is not just because a group of small-minded, repressed, unhappy men have wanted to control the people. Rather, that to claim this promise, there is indescribable risk involved. The good news of liberation can actually be terrifying news to those who would like to obtain it. As Andrew Harvey so brilliantly and passionately lays forth for us, to achieve this promise of doing greater things than Jesus himself means that we have to become as Jesus was. We must lose our lives so that we may gain it. We are told that we must allow ourselves to go through our own journey of transfiguration, our own crucifixions, if you will, go through our own Christing experience. This sacred Christ path involves tearing ourselves open into complete vulnerability, fully experiencing the ecstasy and glory of God, as well as journeying into the desert, into temptation, and eventually onto the cross itself. We, as Jesus, must come to a place where we absorb the pain of all creation, be burned into nothingness, and emerge a transformed person, a resurrected person. This demanding path will result in our ability to remain prayerfully, joyfully, and lovingly centered in divine coolness and calmness while dwelling in searing, passionate flames of life. Upon stepping into our transformed Christed self, we are then called into loving action, into a life of radical, mystical service. For our journey is not a personal one, it is instead one which brings us into the center of all beings, compelling us to acts of justice, mercy, and kindness. This is a much more demanding task than simply reciting the sinner's prayer, confessing our sins and accepting Jesus into our hearts as a benign Savior. No wonder we rarely are taught it, and no wonder we often fail to hear it or follow it.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because it's like, why do we not want to see ourselves as the divine beings that we are? Why do we not want to see our potential? And that does make it hard, because, you know, if we want to always strive to do the very best that we can to live into this divine image that we were created in, we will still always fall short. We're not perfect. And it's hard to accept that we're doing the best that we can and we're not going to be perfect. And that leads to pain. And again, it leads to the fear and the shame and the guilt and all that. And it's easier to just say, oh, I can't help it. I was born imperfect and I'm just going to be imperfect. And then you're not striving for a goal you can't ever quite reach. And we don't realize that the joy is not in reaching the top. The joy is the journey. The joy is the trying to reach the top. That's where the beauty is, the glory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
And I want to acknowledge, as I read it, I wanted to pause and to say something, so I'll say it now. One of the things that what I wrote in there was about acknowledging that even in the bad there is good, right? And I want to reflect back to you that what I have noticed when we do our check-ins is that the list of gratitudes are becoming longer.
Yes,
Mm.
I agree.
Than the list of angst. And it's not because the angst and the problems aren't there, but a number of you tonight, when you checked in, you honored the pain and the grief and the joy in it. And some of you, I know Penny, you said it often, and Deb, about allowing yourselves to just be in the moment to feel that God is with you.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't even know it, but you're living this whole concept already.
Love it.
Yeah. Other feedback and thoughts?
Well, somebody said to me once, anytime you think that you're in a bad place, you can be guaranteed that there are many others that are in a worse place than you are.
Yes. Yeah.
And that gives you a lot of food for thought too.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't have a $1 million house to live in, but I'm also not running to the border of Poland to keep from getting blown up either.
Yeah.
Just as a simple example.
Right.
Mm. Yeah.
Or even avoiding comparison with that, you know, that, geez, some people are worse. Even for me, it helps realizing some people are in the same boat. Other people have gone through the same things I have. They've dealt with the same anxieties. They've dealt with the same fears. They've dealt with the same guilt from mistakes they've made.
Yeah.
I'm not alone in this.
And knowing that you are not alone and seeking the connection and the community when you're in the midst of it goes straight in the face of the separation
Mm.
that we hang on the apple.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've thought a lot is, why would I be picked to be queer? And why would I choose to be queer if it's a choice, which I don't think it is, but anyway. But in reflecting back, if I weren't queer, look at all of the absolutely phenomenally wonderful people I would have missed having in my life.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's true.
A big blessing,
Mhm,
Yeah.
in
mhm.
spite of some of the trials and tribulations that go along with having that status.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known most of you guys.
Sure.
That's right.
Amen.
I want to, Tom, go ahead.
I just want to commend you. That was such a powerful and what it just, you said it so well. You know, it rivals that famous saying, Marianne Williamson, that's going around, how dare you, not, go for your thing. And, and it also parallels, with Carolyn Mace, who was before, going into all these different directions of so many things, spirituality. She started out as a, a medical intuitive and a healer, and she would bring these things into people, but people would not heal because of the same thing. They were afraid. It's almost like they're not taking up their mat, like in that story of Jesus. This guy's sitting at this thing for 40 years. And, like, do you want to be healed? And people, as much as they think they do, when they are given this thing, it's just, we have to, I don't know what that is, that inner fear to embrace our glory that's there. And I'm guilty of it as well.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to connect that same concept to what we're experiencing in the world right now, right? It's really, I'm smirking because I have a cat who just looked over the laptop at me. It's very cute. I wish I could have shown it to you. But the concept of what's happening in the world right now, because it's really easy to say, I feel bad for the children and the women and the men who are being bombed out, right? I feel horrible. I can, plaster blue and yellow on my Facebook feed. I can, do all of that, which is necessary. And don't hear me incorrectly. That is necessary because I know that they are hearing it. But the other part that is also vitally important, even on a larger scale than even Russia and Ukraine right now, is we have to begin to speak up about the disparities and the violence that is happening in all aspects of the world. And that violence, I know it's quaint, but violence is not the answer. And can we and will we sacrifice with our brothers and sisters? Because if this war continues for any length of time, and we're already feeling some of it, what is our ability to sacrifice with our brothers and sisters? And that doesn't just mean what's happening right now in Ukraine. Will this change minds, for instance, on how we talk about refugees? Will this situation change our minds when we talk about refugees from other countries? I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
I want to show you one last thing, and then we'll call it a night. I know this is a lot of information. This is from Matthew Fox's book called Original Blessing. It's one of his center points. I would not recommend it as a read. I would recommend a much smaller a book called Creation Spirituality for Liberating the World, or something to that effect. Original Blessing is very dense, but some of you know this story. When I found out I was adopted in 1987, my birth mother's sister, they're all Catholic, but my birth mother's sister was involved in the altar guild of her Catholic church, and she also received a Matthew's book, Original Blessing, from somebody. She gave it to me, and it literally changed my life. Literally, not at that moment, but over the course of the years. But what I'm about to show you allowed me to remain a Christian. The reason why is because it said all of the things that I had been thinking but didn't have the words to. Fall redemption theology, as we said, is what is primarily at the center of Christianity. You have fallen, therefore you need to be redeemed. When we use that as the starting point, a whole litany of how we view God, Christ, and one another and the earth falls into place. Both and, either or, one over the other. But if we were to start from a blessing point of view, something else happens. When we start from a creation-centered point of view, the whole stuff on the right ends up coming out. I highlighted just a few things, but you go through and read it later. From a fall redemption point of view, we are taught the mortification of the body. The body is bad. Whereas for creation, there's a discipline towards birthing. Passion is a curse instead of passion is a blessing. God is father. Well, how about God as mother, child, as well as father? This one's important. Suffering is the wages for sin. What if we looked at it as suffering is birth pangs of the universe? Death is wages for sin. No, death is a natural event, a prelude to recycling and rebirth. In fall redemption theology, we're taught that the return to the past is a state of perfection and innocence. Creation-centered imperfection is integral to all nature. In the one, life begins with sin. In the other, life begins with God's creative energy. One is science, the sciences of nature unimportant versus the science and teaching about, teaches us about nature. Dualistic, either or. Dialectical, both and. Suspicious of the body and violent in its body. Soul images, soul makes war with the body versus welcoming the body and gentle in its body and the soul in imagery. Soul loves the body, etc. And then it goes on. Personal salvation instead of salvation and healing of the people of God in the cosmos. Human as sinner, human as a royal person who can choose to create or destroy. Repent or transform and be transformed. The spirituality of the powerful. How about looking at it as a spirituality of the powerless? Humanity is sinful. Instead, let's look at it as humanity is divine and capable of demonic and sinful choices. Right? None of this precludes the evil that happens in the world, but it's how we look at it. And I'd like to, first of all, thoughts, and then I'll bring us to a close. What's your initial in reading some of those?
This could change everything. This is huge.
It's really huge.
It sure is.
It's really, really, really huge. You are absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct.
It's
Boy,
like
would
the
it
brick
make
at the
such-
very bottom of the building. If you take it out, then the building that says you're horrible falls apart.
Very good.
Mhm.
really will separate it and make a really big truce. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, but it is believable.
Mhm. Mhm.
So what about I think it's in Revelation at the end that says basically nobody can change any words in this book, in the Bible. And, these are supposed to be, like I said, unchangeable. Don't mess with it. Don't change it. There's a warning there that says you don't do that. And I don't know I think there was some kind of or else. Do you know what I'm talking about, Reverend Pat?
Let's have Patricia answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Patricia,
Yeah,
please.
what I think that warning is saying to us is basically warning us about the way that theologians have misinterpreted the Bible and have created this doctrine of original sin and have used it to harm people. And that, yes, you can take these words and make them out to say something other than what they actually say. You can actually take these words and make them cause more harm than good. And I think it's warning us about the ways that the church historically has misused it, and it's trying to get us to not do that, trying to get us to not lay into it things that are not into it. Like the Adam and Eve story doesn't say that we're terrible, sinful people. We wrote that into it. It doesn't say that there. There's lots of things that we've written into it that it doesn't say.
Yeah. But it's everywhere. I mean, everything's all messed up. And this was supposed to be a book that was supposed to be pure and unmessed up.
And I think the part, Penny, that is important to hold on to is some of the yuck is not in scripture. It has been taught from the pulpits.
Yes.
It's like an overlay has been put on top of it. And maybe that's the
Right.
adding to it. I think what
Yeah.
what Patricia's saying.
Yeah.
What does
Okay.
Jesus say about homosexuality? I've forgotten who publishes this, and there's a blank page.
Yeah.
It doesn't say anything.
Mhm.
Which actually, though, is incorrect. That needs to be revised because Jesus did talk about it in that he affirmed same-sex relations.
Right, the
He
centurion.
absolutely, he affirmed the centurion and
That's
his
right.
and his boy, and he also said when what he talked about eunuchs. But you
Right.
are correct. Back in the 70s and 80s, that was an amazing pamphlet to bring to gay pride. Yes. So
Thank you.
Another thing that I really like is God made me, and God don't make junk.
There you go.
That's right. That's right.
exactly right.
Right.
So I've given you a lot of stuff. Any last thing, and then we're going to close up. Yes, John. Mhm.
Yeah, I was thinking it's really powerful to be what I'll call a collective victim. Putin goes in the Ukraine to stop Nazis. Straights kill gays, transgender people because they're evil. I mean, it's so simple to project our crap onto others, but it's very difficult to point the finger at yourself,
Right.
and then meaning
Yes.
you take responsibility,
Right.
and you also take a journey inward that most people don't want to go.
Right.
I don't want to look at that shadow. I don't want to look at the evils I've done. I don't want to look that I have an inner Putin. So, it's easy to say, hey, I'm a victim. And I will say God's more powerful and I'll just acquiesce. But I don't take that inner journey. That's the natural evolution of being alive.
Well said.
Yeah.
The saying that I like too is when you point the finger at someone, there's a lot more fingers pointing back at you.
Yes, that's for sure.
Right.
It's a similar thing I've seen that says, I don't see you how you are. I see you how I am.
Right.
And that's a whole other conversation, but you are absolutely correct. That's the core of a lot of oppression that happens in the world.
Right.
And Pat, thank you for all these PDFs. I love
You're
them.
welcome. Good.
Yes.
Fabulous, fabulous.
Good. So please, if you have the opportunity, take and read through any of them. I tried to highlight some of the things that I thought were important. We can, talk briefly about it next time. I do want to. So next week we'll begin with the 4 paths and of the journey, and it's awe and wonder next week.
Yay.
Or in other words, gratitude. All right. So that's going to be the huge focus.
And just a friendly reminder for the check-in, you have the opportunity to think all week long, how am I a blessing? Not just how am I a sin, but how am I a blessing?
Exactly.
How am I original blessing?
Right. And I also want to give you one other assignment that I think that if you can start to do this, you're going to start getting the core of this whole creation spirituality, original blessing, and how it can live out in your life. Anytime that you find yourself wanting to say either or, say both and.
Both and.
Say both and.
Oh,
and here's where I have found it that just being conscious of how many times I say either or but,
Mhm.
okay, it and shift it to both and. For instance, somebody can bug the poop out of me, and
Mhm.
I also appreciate the contribution that they gave to whatever, right?
Mhm.
Okay, because when we get stuck in the either or mentality or the but mentality,
Mhm.
we divide ourselves.
Mm.
Yes,
It's
it's terrible.
Mhm. So
It's true.
just in your own language, just when either you're talking about yourself, you're talking about something you've done, you're talking about somebody else, and you find yourself wanting to do but or either or, shift at least in your mind until it comes out as language. Both
Yeah.
and, both and,
Both and.
both
Wasn't
and.
in that last session you said that UCC has come out and said that the correct pronoun for God is they?
They, yeah,
UCC has come out with a statement on that they is
them
actually
and
is that a more appropriate pronoun for God is they
Yeah.
them, because it encompasses both and.
Yeah.
Both and more.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, all righty.
Cool.
Okay. Well,
Great.
good stuff.
Very good.
Thank you.
I offer blessings. I'm going to stop the recording a second here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
In a second.